morning. Welcome to the midweek edition of your free breakfast show on Leadership Television inside Nigeria. Today is September 3, 2025, and my name is Winifred Weber, your host on the program. On today's show, we are looking at what the papers are saying, and incidentally, all the papers we have on our lineup today are on PDP crisis on the forthcoming convention. Leadership is leading with that story. We also have Vanguard, we have The Punch, we have the Daily Times, and of course, all the papers, like I mentioned, like This Day also, including This Day, are onto PDP crisis. Of course, leadership first we'll have to take and see what the story is all about. And to talk on that leading story, we have a leadership correspondent who will be joining us shortly for that leading story on leadership. Wike camp PDP governors on coalition course over convention. Like I mentioned earlier, this is a trendy story on today's national dailies. So we're going to be calling our correspondents James Quinn and Igor Oyoyo, who incidentally anchored the story to tell us more about PDP. Who is going to blink first? Is it Wike camp or the PDP governors? Welcome to the show once again. However, before they come on air, let's just get some excerpts from the leading story. We move over to page 4 of leadership. Oh, this time around is page 6. The political camp of the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory FCT, Nyesom Wike, and the leadership of the People's Democratic Party PDP appear to have divergent views regarding the party's November National Convention in Ibadan, the Oyo State capital. While the Wike group has issued an ultimatum to the party's National Working Committee and the NWC to immediately adhere to court directives and ensure internal fairness or risk an invalid national convention, the PDP national chairman, Ambassador Ilia Damagun, has insisted the event will go on as planned. The faction, under the auspices of eminent leaders and concerned stakeholders of PDP, after a meeting held at the residence of the FCT minister at Life Camp Abuja, urged the party's leadership to resolve the crisis or face consequences regarding the convention's legitimacy. Their position was conveyed in a communique delivered late Monday night by the former governor of Benue State, Samuel Otom, on behalf of the G5 governors at the end of the meeting. The gathering included influential figures such as FCT Minister Nyesom Wike, former governors Ifeanyi Ugwuanyi Enugu, Okezie Ikpeazu Abia, Ayodele Fayose Ekiti, and PDP National Secretary Sam Anyanwu. I don't know, Igor Oyoyo and James Quinn, are you live now? Good morning. Okay, we move ahead to the same review on leadership newspaper. However, no micro-zoning opposed Wike's camp, and Damakun insists that convention will hold as planned. Leading story today on leadership newspaper and also on the other papers we have on our lineup. Before James Quinn and Igor Yoyo join us to talk more on the leading story, let's take the review of other stories gracing the cover of leadership. Rev's leadership exclusive report sparks probe into controversial hiring. And on the business boss of leadership today, Wednesday, September 3, 2025, recapitalization, fresh measures loom for Tier 2 banks as deadline nears, according to reports. Pressure on Nigerian Tier 2 banks is intensifying as the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, March 2026 recapitalization deadline approaches. New research by SBM Intelligence warns that many may be swept up in a fresh wave of mergers and acquisitions. In 2024, the CBN directed all commercial banks to raise their minimum paid-up capital to 500 billion naira for international banks, 200 billion naira for national banks, and 50 billion naira for regional banks. According to the latest SBM report, Capital Competition and Consolidation, the new rules are designed not merely as a compliance exercise, but as a strategic imperative to fortify the sector's capacity to withstand macroeconomic shocks, support Nigeria's ambition for a $1 trillion economy. The story continues more on page 7 of Leadership newspaper. Recapitalization, Fred measures loom for tier 2 banks as deadline nears, according to SBM reports. We move ahead to the other stories on the cover of Leadership. NCAA urges EFCC to tackle aviation fraud. Nigeria-India bid for 2030 Commonwealth Games. That story is on page 10 of Leadership newspaper. And Rivers APC says we'll work with Fubara after his return. The story continues on page 21 of Leadership. We'll work with Fubara after his return, says Rivers APC. Of course, during the just concluded council polls in Rivers State, APC won 20 council seats. Obasanjo says children dying of malaria in AI age unacceptable. That story continues on page 20 of Leadership. ASU federal government disputes NEC to decide next line of action, says union leader. That takes us to a story above the above the masthead of Leadership. BPE plans listing to Disco's Genco on stock exchange. And lastly, Tinubu says we've met 2025 revenue target in August. We are stable. And that also is a leading story on one of the papers today, national papers today in Nigeria. We move to the page 3 of Leadership, where we have a permanent fixture, our stand. Like I always mention or explain, our stand is the editorial and the stand of the paper for today. Today's stand is on why Nigeria's media must separate crime from tribe. Why Nigeria's media must separate crime from tribe. Today's stand in Leadership. Like we normally do, let's take some excerpts from today's stand. One of the most persistent challenges confronting Nigeria's fragile peace is how the media reports crime and conflict. Time and again, news headlines attribute violence and criminality to the ethnic or religious background of the alleged perpetrators. Such reporting practices turn media logic upside down, disregarding journalism's fundamental principles of objectivity and fairness. They fuse suspicion, entrench divisions, and distract society from addressing the real issue, criminality. The matter was highlighted in a recent media training program in Plateau State organized by Amnesty International Nigeria. Many journalists admitted to the widespread practice of qualifying criminals by their ethnic or religious identities. When asked to reflect on this approach, they considered that it does little to serve the cause of justice or peace. We move towards the conclusion. Of course, the paper normally takes a stand towards the end of the paper. This newspaper believes that the time has come for Nigerian media to re-examine its role in either deepening division or promoting unity. As the nation battles insecurity on multiple fronts, the press cannot afford to be a willing tool in the hands of those who profit from chaos. To continue framing criminals as representatives of entire ethnic or religious communities is to abandon the ethics of journalism and undermine the very peace Nigeria desperately needs. We therefore call on editors, regulators, and policymakers to urgently confront this issue. Responsible reporting must become the standard, not the exception. Today's excerpts from today's stand in Leadership newspaper. Why Nigeria's media must separate crime from tribe. We move to the back page of Leadership newspaper, where we have our stand, and of course today's stand is on where we have Wednesday column, the back page of the paper, Wednesday column with Olufunke Barua. Today she's writing on a billionaire's guide to making it big, and that book is from one of Nigeria's billionaires, Femi Otedola. In quote, Otedola's memoir is a field manual for operating an economy where policy, politics, and profit are braided together, and where character and connections in the end are a competitive advantage. Quote from today's column with Olufunke Barua, A Billionaire's Guide to Making It Big. Before we leave the back page, Ghana Must Go is calling. News, federal government to remove pockets from police uniform to curb bribery. And Ghana Must Go said, what about transfers? Wow, good one. It's on that note we conclude review of Leadership newspaper this Wednesday. For more, log into www.leadership.ng. Yes, we also have our correspondents online to discuss more on the leading story in leadership and the other papers we have on our lineup today. But before we do, let's move to the next paper on our lineup, and that is Vanguard. Vanguard says National Convention, PDP draws battle line with Wike's camp. National Convention, PDP draws battle line with Wike's camp. Wike's camp cites court orders, demands fresh congresses in Anambra, Ebonyi, Southeast, warns against microzoning of presidential ticket orders. You can't hold party to ransom, PDP fires back. There's Wike, Otom Fayose, Ikpeazu, Ugwanyi, orders to form faction. Mohammed Fintri, Wabara, Damagun talks tough. Kickers to the PDP leading story on Vanguard newspaper. National Convention, PDP draws battle line with Wike's camp. We move ahead still on Vanguard newspaper. States have no excuse not to pay beyond 70,000 naira minimum wage. NECA, of course, they have to borrow a leaf from Imo State governor who actually increased the minimum wage to 105,000 naira. Kudos to the Imo State governor. NECA says states have no excuse not to pay beyond 70,000 naira minimum wage. Visa overstay, US UK ramp up warnings may ban violators. Ghana president fires Chief Justice over abuse of office. And in sports, Super Eagles camp comes alive as training begins in Uyo. That takes us to his stories about the masthead of Vanguard. DMO tells states to prioritize PPP, not borrowing. That is public-private partnership, PPP, not borrowing. The story runs on page 20 of Vanguard. Tinubu says we've met our revenue target, no longer borrowing from domestic banks. Of course, also a leading story on leadership. Made in Nigeria footwear can be best in the world as a CEO, Mona Matthews shoes. World redelineation, INEC under fire as the Shekiri nation calls for probe. That comes to an end. The review of front headline stories on Vanguard this Wednesday. For more, log into the website of Vanguard newspapers. We move ahead to the next paper we have on our lineup, and that is Nigerian Tribune. Nigerian Tribune is also still talking PDP forthcoming convention. Ibadan convention, PDP governors Bear Fang says we are not cowards. Ibadan convention, PDP governors Bear Fang says we are not cowards. Leading story on Nigerian Tribune. One faction of fools to keep off. My restrained tolerance not a sign of weakness. Damagun. Party inaugurates 119-member organizing committee. Wike, Fayose, Otom Gwanyi, others give conditions. Kickers to the leading story on Nigerian Tribune this Wednesday. Ibadan convention, PDP governors Bear Fangs say we are not cowards. Tinubu records DG of NTA, ED News set aside fresh appointments. CVRO hits 2.6 million in 2 weeks, INEC. Obaladoja backs Adeleke Son content bid, praise for actualization of Ibadan State. Health, over 1 billion people living with mental health conditions, WHO. 2027, former CPC leaders declare support for Tinubu's re-election. CPC bloc solidly behind you, Abbas says president. Nigeria won't borrow again to fund operations, coming from President Tinubu. And that takes us to the stories about the masthead of Nigerian Tribune. Resurgence of killings in North Central, evidence of government failure, article. BPE targets listing of 2 discos, 1 Genco on stock exchange. Revenue hits 170.7 billion naira in 8 months. That concludes review of front headline stories on Nigerian Tribune this Wednesday. For more, log into the website of Nigerian Tribune. We move to the next paper on our lineup, and that is the Daily Times. Daily Times also on PDP imbroglio. It says PDP leaders talk tough, say no one can stop national convention. Leading story on today's Daily Times newspaper. PDP leaders talk tough, say no one can stop national convention. That leading story is on page 2 of the Daily Times. Court remands 24-year-old over attempted murder arson. NCAA 6 EFCC's assistance in tackling aviation fraud. ECPA's conviction reaffirms commitment to fight against terrorism, says CDS. FCTA moves to reclaim River Park estate lands, declares developers trespassers. And beneath that is a strip. NAMA finally implements new salary structure. That takes us to his stories about the masthead of the Daily Times. Tinubu hails Buhari's legacy, reassures allies on economic stability, national recovery. Base Mokwa signed agreement to reposition African maritime economy. That brings to a close the review of front headline stories on the Daily Times newspaper this Wednesday. For more, log into the website of Daily Times newspaper. We move to the next paper we have on our lineup, and that is the let's talk politics as we move to the cover of The Guardian. The Guardian says battle for Buhari's 12.7 million ballots. Tinubu Pali CPC group says revenue target met amid data gaps. Enough is enough. PDP governor tell Wike dismiss threats to abort convention. ADC accuses Tinubu of nepotism as Atiku decries rising insecurity. Opposition seeks legal redress for Rivers local government poll irregularities. CVRO Osun maintains lead with 474,372 as INEC registers 2.5 million in 2 weeks. Court voice mandatory 15-year service requirement for soldiers. And we move to just beneath the masthead of The Guardian. Defense headquarters denies armed forces supporting payment of criminal groups. Federal government lists 91 public firms for privatization. Dangote refinery exports forced gasoline cargo to US. And that also concludes the review of front headline stories on The Guardian this Wednesday. From The Guardian, we move to the last paper on our lineup this Wednesday, and that is the Daily Sun. The Daily Sun has a different story entirely on its cover story. Of course, this is one of the stories we just read in The Guardian. It says federal government moves sales of airports, refineries, Ajaokuta Steel, 89 other enterprises too. Federal government moves sales of airports, refineries, Ajaokuta Steel, 89 other enterprises too. And of course, it tallies with what The Guardian just said, 91 government enterprises. Few marketers jostle for dominance as prices drop. And Tinubu says, I've met my revenue target for 2025. Insecurity is APC's strategy to remain in power. Article. We move towards the masthead of Daily Sun newspaper. US explains visa cancellation for Nigerians orders. And lastly, beside the masthead of Daily Sun, ADC accuses president of running government like exclusive club. Claims government's most divisive. Will not dignify impostors with response, says APC. And that brings to a close the review of front headline stories of Daily Sun newspaper this Wednesday. For more, log into the website of Daily Sun newspaper, www.thesun.ng. Well, viewers, is on that note we've come to the end of today's Inside Nigeria, where we reviewed some national newspapers, including Nigeria's most influential leadership. My name is Winifred Ugbebo. Same time, same station. Tomorrow is another fresh edition of the program. Meanwhile, stay tuned on this same station for news on the hour. Thanks for joining us.
Be part of our brand. Leadership for God and country. Be part of our brand. Leadership for God.